Hey everyone, welcome back to another Wheel Wednesday video, where I give you the most important specs and features of your favorite cars. This week, we're going to be talking about the original Godzilla from Buick, before the GTR was even cool. Before we get into this video, I'd like to explain it. This is going to be another comparison video. By the end of this video, I hope to prove to you that the Buick GNX was the original Godzilla. I will give you everything you need to know about the Buick Grand National Experimental, and then I'll compare it against other cars to show you that it really was the original Godzilla and nothing could beat it. So without further ado, let's get to the video, and then I'll give you my thoughts when it's over. The 1987 Buick GNX. The 1987 Ford Mustang GT. The 1987 Chevrolet Camaro IROC-Z. The GNX had a turbocharged and intercooled 3.8-liter V6 making 300 horsepower. The Mustang GT had a 5-liter EFI high-output V8 making 225 horsepower. The Camaro had a 305 cubic inch tuned port fuel-injected V8 making 225 horsepower. The Buick Grand National had a 4-speed automatic transmission. The Mustang GT could be had with a 5-speed manual transmission or a 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission. The IROC-Z came with a 4-speed 4L60 automatic transmission. The Buick Grand National had 10.5-inch front disc brakes and 9.5-inch rear drum brakes. The Mustang had 10.84-inch vented front disc brakes and 9-inch rear drum brakes. The IROC-Z had 10.5-inch front disc brakes and 11.65-inch rear disc brakes. Strange to have bigger rear disc brakes. The Grand National Experimental, compared to the regular GNX, had a larger turbo, dynamic oil seals, and more fin-dense intercooler. It also had a recalibrated prom. The Mustang GT, compared to the 1986 model, had clean aerodynamic front fascia, a new dash, and electronic fuel injection. Compared to the Z28 Camaro, the IROC-Z had bigger 16-inch wheels, a Wonder Bar, and special badging. The GNX came with Goodyear Eagle Gatorback VR50 tires. The Mustang GT came with Goodyear Eagle Gatorback VR15 tires. The Camaro came with Goodyear Eagle Gatorback VR16 tires. The Grand National weighed 3,545 pounds. The Mustang GT weighed 2,791 pounds. The IROC-Z weighed 3,263 pounds. The GNX could do 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. The quarter mile in 13.4 seconds, and had a limited top speed of 124 miles per hour. The 87 Mustang could do 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds, the quarter mile in 14.1 seconds, and it had a top speed of 150 miles per hour. The IROC Z did 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds, the quarter mile in 15.9 seconds, and had a top speed of 130 miles per hour. The Grand National started at $29,389. The Mustang GT started at $12,480. The IROC Z started at $13,488. The reason why I chose the two cars that I put against the Grand National Experimental is because those were considered its competition at the time. I know it looks ridiculous. The Grand National absolutely blows all of these cars out of the water. First of all, even though the Grand National Experimental only had a turbocharged V6, while the Camaro and the Mustang had V8 engines, it still made more power than both of them. It made 300 horsepower, a whole 75 horsepower more than the Mustang and the Camaro, which is completely ridiculous. As you can tell from the brake specs of the Grand National, it didn't have the best stopping power, nor could it go around corners very good. It didn't have the best suspension compared to the Camaro or Mustang, but who's really into that these days? Anytime you see a GTR, the Godzilla now, you see it roll racing or drag racing. So here, who cares about corners or stopping? It is all about speed. And speed is exactly what the Grand National Experimental had. Let me give you some numbers that are down on the computer in front of me. The Buick Grand National did 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. That is crazy compared to the 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds of the Mustang and the 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds of the Camaro. And like I said, it's all about drag racing these days. Well, back then, the Grand National could cover a quarter mile in 13.4 seconds. That is blisteringly fast compared to the 14.1 second quarter mile of the Mustang and the 15.9 second quarter mile of the Camaro. Absolutely crazy. The only thing that the Grand National does not have going for it is its top speed. Its top speed is rated at 124 miles an hour, which is limited. The reason why Buick limited the speed here is they said if it went any faster, it would turn it into a Frisbee, since it is a G-body. But the Mustang had a top speed of 150, and the Camaro had a top speed of 130. So the top speeds were definitely higher on the Camaro and the Mustang. So in this comparison, the Grand National Experimental absolutely wipes the floor with the Mustang and the Camaro. It was the final hurrah of the Grand National, and they really went out with a bang with all of its crazy upgrades, which you could see in the video that you just watched. But now I want to give it a little harder competition. I'm going to blow your mind in the next part of this video. Check out some of the other cars that the Grand National could compete with. The 1987 Buick Grand National Experimental. The 1987 Chevrolet Corvette. And the 1987 Lamborghini Countach. The GNX had 300 horsepower. The Corvette had 240 horsepower. The Countach had 449 horsepower. The GNX did 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. The Corvette did 0 to 60 in 6.3 seconds. The Lamborghini Countach did 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. The GNX did the quarter mile in 13.4 seconds. The Corvette did the quarter mile in 15.11 seconds. The Countach did the quarter mile in 12.9 seconds. The GNX had top speed of 124 miles per hour. The Corvette had a top speed of 150 miles per hour. The Countach had a top speed of 173 miles per hour. The GNX cost $29,389. The Corvette cost $27,799. The Lamborghini Countach cost $118,000. Now let me break down this absolutely ludicrous comparison that I put together. As you can see, you had to spend big money to beat the Grand National in anything. Kind of like the GTR when it came out. It was cheaper than everything else and it beat everything in its path. It's crazy to think that a Buick Regal could beat a Chevrolet Corvette, but that it did. The Chevrolet Corvette had a 0 to 60 time of 6.3 seconds, which is slow compared to the 5.4 seconds of the Grand National. The Corvette had a much slower quarter mile time of 15.11 seconds compared to the Grand National's 13.4 seconds. The Corvette still has the Grand National beat in top speed at 150 miles an hour. Like I said, the Buick Grand National Experimental only had a top speed of 124 miles an hour because it would be too unstable at any speed higher than that. As you can see from the Lamborghini Countach, you had to spend big money and do a lot more fuss to beat the Grand National in anything. You had to spend $118,000 and you had to get a V12 engine to beat the Buick Grand National Experimental. It's crazy to think that you needed nearly 450 horsepower to beat the Grand National. The Lamborghini Countach had a 0 to 60 time of 5.2 seconds, only 0.2 seconds faster than the Grand National's 5.4 second 0 to 60. The Countach could do the quarter mile in 12.9 seconds, which is only marginally better than the 13.4 second quarter mile the Grand National put down. Once again, the Countach had the best top speed, which it was the car with the highest top speed at the time, so it definitely beat the Grand National there. But what do you expect? With that very aerodynamic looking wedge shape, even though it really wasn't that aerodynamic, so it had to have been the horsepower. But anyway, the Grand National absolutely whoops everything. The Grand National Experimental is a good middle value car at $30,000. It's not as expensive as the Countach at $118,000, and it's more than the Corvette, but it outperformed the Corvette a decent amount. So I think the Grand National Experimental is a good middle value car. To me, the Lamborghini Countach was a terrible value at $118,000. That is crazy expensive for a car that can barely beat a Regal. I mean, if you want the looks and stuff, well, go ahead and get it with that money, but it was ridiculous and way too expensive to spend that money on a car like that that barely can beat a Buick. Anyway, that wraps up this video. Hopefully I proved to you that the Buick GNX was the original Godzilla. As you know, the internet is not always right, and that means my videos aren't always right. So, if any of these facts are wrong, please let me know in the comments. I like to learn as much as I can about cars from the 80s and 90s. I mean, after all these cars were made before I was even born. But that's all I have for you in this Wheel Wednesday video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And to see more of my videos, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I thank you for watching.